The champagne flute trembled in Brielle Norton's hand as she spotted Derek crossing the gallery floor, his arm draped possessively around a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Her stomach dropped. Of course he'd be here. Of course he'd look that smug. And of course she'd chosen tonight the opening of her best friend's art exhibition to attend completely alone after spending the last 3 months healing from the devastation he'd left behind. "Brielle, darling, you look positively pale." The voice beside her was velvet and smoke, utterly unfamiliar, yet somehow commanding her complete attention. She turned to find a man who simply couldn't exist in the real world. He was tall, impossibly tall, with skin like marble, and hair so white it seemed to capture and reflect the gallery's soft lighting. His eyes were the color of dark wine, almost black in the dimness, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm sorry. Do I know you?" she managed, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "You do now." He moved closer, and she caught the faint scent of something ancient and expensive, old libraries and winter nights. "And unless I'm mistaken, you're about to face someone you'd rather avoid. That man approaching looks like he considers himself quite important." Brielle's eyes widened. Derek was indeed heading their way, his trajectory unmistakable, that familiar self-satisfied expression already forming on his face. She could practically hear the condescending greeting he'd offer, the false concern, the subtle digs about how she was doing after everything. The desperation rose in her throat before she could think it through. She turned to the stranger, her fingers finding his sleeve. The fabric was expensive, some kind of silk blend that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Please," she whispered urgently, her pride crumbling in the face of the humiliation bearing down on her. "Please act like you love me." Those wine-dark eyes studied her for a heartbeat, and something flickered their amusement, perhaps, or maybe recognition of a challenge. Then his entire demeanor shifted. His hand came to rest at the small of her back, possessive and warm even through the fabric of her dress, and he leaned down until his lips nearly brushed her ear. "As you wish, beloved," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear the rolling accent that spoke of old European aristocracy. Then, louder, with genuine warmth that sounded utterly convincing. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me to the modernists." Derek stopped short, his expression faltering. "Brielle, I didn't expect to see you here." "Derek?" She managed to keep her voice steady, emboldened by the solid presence beside her. "I could say the same." "Right, well." Derek's eyes moved to the stranger, and something in his posture changed. He drew himself up, puffing slightly, though he still had to look up to meet the other man's gaze. "I don't think we've met. Derek Patterson. I'm well. I used to date Brielle." "How unfortunate for you." The stranger's voice carried a subtle edge that made the words sound like both condolence and insult. He extended his hand with the grace of someone accustomed to others waiting on his pleasure. "Isidore Hargrove. I'm currently dating Brielle, which makes me significantly more fortunate than you could possibly imagine." The way he said it, the absolute certainty, the subtle emphasis on currently that somehow implied permanence rather than temporariness, sent a shiver down Brielle's spine. Derek's handshake was brief, and she noticed him wince slightly at Isidore's grip. "Hargrove," Derek repeated, his brow furrowing. "That's an unusual name. European?" "Very old family," Isidore replied, dismissing the topic with elegant finality. His hand had moved from Brielle's back to her waist, drawing her closer against his side. She should have felt uncomfortable with a stranger touching her so intimately, but instead she felt safe, protected, as though he'd erected an invisible barrier between her and everything that could hurt her. Derek's date, a willowy blonde whose name Brielle didn't care to remember, leaned in. "We should say hello to the Mitchells, babe. I see them by the sculpture garden." "Right. Good to see you, Brie." Derek's use of the old nickname felt like a violation now, especially compared to the way Isidore had called her beloved with such reverence. "We should grab coffee sometime, catch up." "She's quite busy," Isidore said before Brielle could formulate a response. "But I'm sure if she wishes to see you, she'll reach out. Do enjoy your evening." It was a dismissal, clear and absolute, delivered with such natural authority that Derek actually took a step back. He muttered something about seeing her around and retreated with his date, glancing back once with an expression Brielle had never seen directed at her before, confusion mixed with something that might have been jealousy. The moment they were out of earshot, Brielle stepped away from Isidore, her face burning. "I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate of me. I don't even know you, and I just grabbed you and asked you to God. You must think I'm insane." On the contrary. Isidore's expression had shifted to something warmer, genuinely amused. "I think you're desperate, which is entirely different from insane. Though I confess myself curious about what that man did to inspire such a reaction." Brielle wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the gallery's comfortable temperature. "He cheated on me. For months, apparently. I found out when his other girlfriend called me, thinking I was the affair. Turns out I was the one being kept on the side while he played house with her." The words came out bitter, 3 months of hurt compressed into a few sentences. "He acted like it was my fault somehow, like I should have been more exciting, more available, more something. Then he's a fool." Isidore said it with such conviction that Brielle found herself looking up at him, really looking. He was beautiful in a way that seemed almost artificial, like a sculpture given life. His features were too perfect, too symmetrical, and that skin, it really did look like alabaster, smooth and pale and impossibly flawless. No one actually looked like this. "Who are you, really?" she asked quietly. "And why would you help me?" "I told you. Isidore Hargrove." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, heavy stock with elegant lettering that read simply, his name and a phone number. "As for why, let's say I have a particular distaste for men who don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. And you looked like you needed a champion for a moment." "A champion," she repeated, a small laugh escaping despite everything. "That's very old-fashioned." "I'm a very old-fashioned man." He said it with such seriousness that it should have sounded ridiculous, but somehow it didn't. "Now, since we're supposed to be dating, would you like to actually enjoy this exhibition together? I have strong opinions about contemporary art that you may find either enlightening or insufferable." Brielle knew she should politely decline, thank him again, and disappear into the crowd. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Enlighten me." They spent the next 2 hours moving through the gallery, and Brielle discovered that Isidore's strong opinions were actually remarkably insightful. He could discuss technique and composition with the ease of someone who'd studied art history extensively, but he also had a dry wit that made her laugh more than once. He was attentive without being overbearing, asking her opinions and actually listening to her answers, a courtesy Derek had rarely extended. She also noticed other things. He never ate or drank, despite passing servers offering both. His skin remained perfectly cool when his hand brushed hers, and people seemed to instinctively give him space, as though recognizing something in him that commanded respect or possibly fear. When the exhibition began to wind down, Isidore walked her to her car, his presence a warm shadow at her side despite the October chill. At her vehicle, Brielle turned to face him, fishing his card from her purse. "Thank you," she said genuinely. "I know this was all fake, but you made tonight bearable. More than bearable, actually." Isidore's head tilted slightly, regarding her with those dark eyes. What if it didn't have to be fake? Her heart stuttered. "What?" "Have dinner with me, tomorrow night." He spoke with the same quiet certainty he'd used all evening, as though the outcome was already decided. "Let me take you somewhere your ex could never afford, and we'll discuss whether this arrangement might benefit us both." "I don't understand. What arrangement?" "You want to show that fool what he lost. I find myself in need of companionship for various social obligations. We're clearly compatible in conversation. Why not continue the performance, at least until you feel you've sufficiently recovered your pride?" It should have sounded cold, transactional. Instead, it sounded reasonable. Brielle bit her lip, considering. She'd sworn off men after Derek, determined to focus on herself, her work as a freelance graphic designer, her small circle of friends. But this wasn't really dating, was it? This was an arrangement, clearly defined, with someone who'd already proven he could play the part convincingly. "Just dinner?" she asked carefully. "Just dinner," he confirmed, "and conversation. I promise to be a perfect gentleman unless you request otherwise." Despite herself, Brielle smiled. "Okay, dinner tomorrow." "Excellent." He took her hand and, in a gesture that should have felt absurdly theatrical but somehow wasn't, pressed his lips to her knuckles. His mouth was cool against her skin. "I'll collect you at 8. Wear something that makes you feel powerful." Then he was gone, disappearing into the parking garage with inhuman speed that Brielle told herself was just a trick of the shadows. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Brielle tried to focus on work, a logo redesign for a local boutique, some social media graphics for a startup, but her mind kept drifting to wine-dark eyes and that voice like velvet over steel. She'd Googled Isidore Hargrove and found almost nothing, which in the digital age seemed impossible. There was a mention in an article about historic preservation, a donation to an art museum, but no social media, no photos, nothing substantial. Red flags, the rational part of her brain whispered, but the rest of her, the part that had felt truly seen for the first time in months during their gallery conversation, told rationality to shut up. At 7:30, she stood before her closet in her underwear, staring at her limited options. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful," he'd said. She settled on a deep burgundy dress she'd bought for Derek's company party but never worn after he'd commented that it was a bit much. The neckline was elegant without being revealing, and the cut made her feel graceful, like someone who belonged in the world Isidore seemed to inhabit. The doorbell rang at precisely 8 o'clock. Brielle grabbed her clutch, checked her lipstick one final time, and headed downstairs from her second-floor apartment. Isidore stood on her doorstep looking like he'd stepped out of a gothic romance novel. He wore a black suit that was definitely custom-tailored, with a charcoal shirt beneath and no tie. His white hair was swept back from his face, emphasizing those sharp cheekbones and that impossible bone structure. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Appreciation, unmistakable and warm. "You look magnificent," he said simply. "The color suits you." "Thank you." She stepped out, locking the door behind her. "You look pretty magnificent yourself." "I have my moments." He offered his arm, which she took, and led her to a car that made her stop in her tracks. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce, black and gleaming, the kind of vehicle that belonged in a museum or a movie. "Is that yours?" she asked faintly. "One of mine, yes. I have a weakness for beautiful things made with craftsmanship and care." He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid into leather seats that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. The restaurant was called Sangiovese, tucked into a historic building in the old quarter of the city. Brielle had walked past it dozens of times without ever really noticing it. The entrance was discreet, marked only by a small brass plaque. Inside, it was all dark wood and candlelight, with heavy curtains and an atmosphere of profound privacy. The maitre d' greeted Isidore by name, leading them to a corner table that was somehow more secluded than all the others, as though reserved permanently for exactly this purpose. Wine appeared without being ordered, poured into crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like prisms. "I should mention I don't know much about wine," Brielle admitted as she settled into her seat. "Derek always ordered for both of us, and it all kind of tasted the same to me." "Then we'll educate your palate." Isidore's smile was genuine. "Or we'll discover you simply don't enjoy wine, which is equally valid. I want you to actually taste things tonight, Brielle, to experience rather than simply endure." The way he said her name carefully, as though it were something precious, made her skin warm. She took a sip of the wine and found it different from anything Derek had chosen, richer and more complex, with flavors she couldn't quite identify but enjoyed nonetheless. "Tell me about yourself," Isidore said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone who'd never been uncomfortable anywhere. "Beyond what that fool did to you, who is Brielle Norton?" So she told him. About growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about her love of art and design, about moving to the city 5 years ago to pursue freelance work, about her dreams of maybe opening her own design studio someday, and her fear that she wasn't talented enough, wasn't business savvy enough, wasn't enough in general. Isidore listened with complete attention, asking questions that demonstrated he was truly hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to talk. When the food arrived, dishes she hadn't ordered, but that were apparently specialties of the house, he encouraged her to try everything, to tell him what she thought without worrying about saying the right thing. She noticed as the meal progressed that while he'd made a show of moving food around his plate, he hadn't actually eaten anything. He'd also barely touched his wine, though he'd ensured her glass was never empty. "You're not eating," she finally said, emboldened by good wine and better conversation. "I have unusual dietary requirements," he replied smoothly, "a medical condition that limits what I can consume. Please don't let it concern you." "That must be difficult. You become accustomed to it over time." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "Tell me, what would you say to your ex if you could speak without consequences? If you knew he would truly hear you?" The question caught her off guard. Brielle set down her fork, considering. "I'd tell him that he made me doubt myself, that his cheating wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about all the little ways he made me feel like I was lacking, like I was never quite what he wanted, even before he strayed." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "And I'd tell him that I wasted 3 years trying to be whatever he needed, instead of asking whether he was what I needed." "And was he?" "No." The word came out firm, certain. "No, he wasn't. He was convenient and relatively successful, and he was there when I was lonely. But he never made me feel the way—" She stopped, flushing. "The way what?" Isidore prompted gently. "The way you made me feel last night," she admitted. "Valued, interesting, worth protecting." Isidore reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His skin was cool, but his touch sent warmth racing up her arm. "You are all those things, Brielle. You were those things before I appeared, and you'll be those things long after. I simply recognized what was already there." She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his, and felt something shift between them. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a performance, but sitting here in the candlelight, the rest of the restaurant fading into irrelevance, it felt dangerously real. "Tell me about you," she said. "Who is Isidore Hargrove?" His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "That's a complicated question." "We have time." He studied her for a long moment, seeming to wage some internal debate. Finally, he spoke. "I come from a very old family, as I mentioned. Old money, old expectations. I've spent most of my life meeting obligations and maintaining appearances. I'm considered royalty in certain circles." "Royalty?" She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Of a sort. It's not recognized by any government, you understand. But within our community, bloodlines matter. I hold a position of significant authority, which comes with both privilege and burden." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. "Those in my world, they see the title, the power, the resources. Very few see the man beneath, and those who do often want something from him." "I don't want anything from you," Brielle said softly. "Except maybe more evenings like this." Isidore's fingers tightened on hers. "Be careful what you wish for, Brielle Norton. I'm not certain you understand what you'd be inviting into your life." "Then help me understand." But he shook his head, releasing her hand and signaling for the check. "Not tonight. Tonight was about you reclaiming some joy. Let's not complicate it with my baggage." The drive back to her apartment was quiet, but not uncomfortable. When Isidore walked her to her door again, Brielle found herself reluctant to say goodnight. At her threshold, she turned to face him. "Can I see you again?" she asked. "For real this time, not just for show." "I was rather hoping you'd ask." His smile was softer than she'd seen it before, almost vulnerable. "Though I should warn you that my life is complicated in ways I'm not yet ready to explain. If we continue this, there will be things you'll need to accept on faith for a while. Everyone has secrets, Isidore." "Not like mine," he said quietly. Then, before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Sleep well, beloved. I'll call you tomorrow." Over the next 3 weeks, Brielle fell into a pattern that felt like a dream. Isidore called every day, usually in the evening, and they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He took her to museums, galleries, concerts, all held at night, she noticed, though he explained it away as his work schedule. He was generous without being ostentatious, thoughtful in ways Derek had never been, remembering tiny details she'd mentioned in passing and acting on them. He brought her a first edition of her favorite book because she'd mentioned reading it in college. He arranged for her to meet a gallery owner who was looking for a designer after she'd expressed interest in arts marketing. He sent flowers to her apartment for no reason, except that he'd walked past a shop and thought of her. But he also maintained certain boundaries. He never invited her to his home. He never ate in front of her, always claiming he'd had a large lunch or had dietary restrictions, and he was never available during daylight hours, no matter what she suggested. Her friends noticed the change in her. Maya, her best friend and the artist whose exhibition had started everything, cornered her at a coffee shop one afternoon. "Okay, spill everything," Maya demanded, stirring sugar into her latte. "You've been glowing for weeks, and don't tell me it's a new skincare routine." Brielle felt herself flush. "I've been seeing someone, the man from your opening, Isidore." "The absolutely gorgeous one who looked at you like you hung the moon?" Maya's eyes went wide. "Brie, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" "It's complicated. We started out as kind of a fake thing to make Derek jealous, but then it became real. Or I think it's real. He's wonderful, Maya, but there's something he's not telling me. Something big. Like a wife and kids big." "No, nothing like that. I don't know exactly. He's just mysterious, private. And I keep telling myself I should push for answers, but when I'm with him, it doesn't seem to matter." Maya reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Just be careful, okay? I'm glad you're happy. You deserve to be happy after what Derek put you through. But make sure this guy is worthy of that happiness." "I will," Brielle promised, though she wasn't sure how to measure worthiness when it came to someone like Isidore. That night, as if summoned by her doubts, Isidore called to cancel their plans. "Something's come up," he said, and she could hear genuine regret in his voice. "Family business that requires my immediate attention. I'm sorry, beloved." "Is everything okay?" she asked, hearing stress beneath his carefully controlled tone. "It will be, but I may be unreachable for a few days. Don't worry if you don't hear from me." "Isidore, wait." But he'd already disconnected. 3 days passed with no word. Brielle told herself not to panic, that he'd been clear about needing space, but the silence felt wrong. On the 4th day, she was working at her favorite cafe when Derek walked in. Her stomach clenched, the old anxiety rising, but it was muted now. She'd grown since that night at the gallery, strengthened by Isidore's regard and her own rediscovered confidence. Derek spotted her immediately and, to her dismay, approached her table. "Hey, Brie, can I sit?" "I'm working, Derek. 5 minutes, please." He looked different somehow, less polished than usual, tired. "I owe you an apology." Against her better judgment, she gestured to the empty chair. 5 minutes. He sat, fidgeting with a coffee stir. "I was an asshole to you. The cheating, the way I made you feel like it was your fault, none of that was okay. I've been thinking about it a lot since I saw you at that gallery, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. Genuinely." Brielle studied him, looking for the trap, the angle. "What brought this on?" "Honestly, seeing you with that guy, Hargrove, the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him, I realized I never made you feel that way. And you deserved someone who would." He met her eyes, and she saw sincerity there, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. "I was threatened by your talent, your independence. So I undermined you in little ways, made myself feel bigger by making you feel smaller. That was wrong." "Yes, it was," she agreed quietly. "But I let you do it. I gave you that power. Are you happy now? With him?" She thought about Isidore's smile, his careful attention, the way he touched her like she was something precious. "I am." When he's not disappearing mysteriously for days at a time. Derek frowned. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Inside joke." She closed her laptop. "I appreciate the apology, Derek, really. But we're done, you and me. Whatever we were, it's over." "I know." He stood, then hesitated. "Just be careful, okay? There's something about that guy. I can't put my finger on it, but he's not what he seems." "None of us are," Brielle replied, and watched her ex walk away, feeling closure settle over her like a blanket. That night, Isidore finally called. His voice was strained, exhausted in a way she'd never heard. "Brielle, I'm sorry for the silence. May I come over?" "Of course. Are you okay?" "I need to tell you the truth," he said, "all of it, and then you'll decide whether you can accept what I am." He arrived within the hour, and Brielle's breath caught when she opened the door. He looked haggard, his usual perfect composure cracked. There were shadows under his eyes, and his skin was even paler than normal, almost translucent. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Isidore, you look terrible. What happened? He moved past her into the small living room, then turned to face her with an expression of profound resignation. I'm a vampire, Brielle. That's what I am, what I've been for over 300 years. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she laughed nervously. That's not funny. It's not meant to be. He held up his hand, and she watched in shock as his nails lengthened into claws, sharp and deadly. His eyes darkened further, the pupils expanding until there was almost no white visible. When he opened his mouth, she saw fangs where his canines should have been. I am Isidore Hargrove, king of the Northern Vampire Court, and I've been lying to you since we met. Brielle's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the couch, her mind reeling. This isn't possible. Vampires aren't real. We're very real. We've simply become exceptionally good at hiding over the centuries. He retracted the claws, the fangs, forcing himself back into the semblance of humanity. The past few days, I've been dealing with a challenge to my authority. Another vampire who wants my throne and thought to gain it through violence. It's handled now, but it reminded me that my world is dangerous, and I've been dragging you into it without your knowledge or consent. You drink blood, she said faintly, pieces clicking into place. That's why you never eat, and the nighttime meetings, and the pale skin. And oh God, I've been dating a vampire. Technically, we never defined what we were doing as dating, Isidore offered, then winced. That was poorly timed levity. I apologize. Brielle pressed her hands to her face, trying to process. Part of her wanted to run screaming. But another part, a larger part, was thinking about all their conversations, all the moments of connection. The being standing in her living room was the same one who'd protected her from Derek's smugness, who'd listened to her dreams, who'd made her feel cherished for the first time in her life. Are you going to hurt me? She asked finally. Never. The word was vehement, absolute. I would die before allowing harm to come to you, Brielle. That's actually the problem. I'm in love with you. Her head snapped up. What? Isidore moved closer, kneeling before the couch so they were at eye level. I didn't plan for this. I saw a woman in need and thought to amuse myself by playing hero for an evening. But then you were brilliant and funny and so remarkably human in the best possible way. You made me remember what it was like to feel something beyond duty and obligation, and now I'm in love with you, which is dangerous for you and forbidden by my court and utterly selfish of me. Forbidden why? Her voice came out as a whisper. Because humans and vampires don't mix, not in permanent ways. You're fragile, mortal. You age and die in what feels like an eye blink to us. The laws of my kind forbid romantic entanglements with humans, specifically to prevent the heartbreak of watching someone you love wither while you remain unchanged. His hand came up, almost touching her face, but stopping just short. I should walk away. Let you return to your normal life. Find a normal man who can give you normal things like daylight and growing old together. But, she prompted because she could hear the unspoken word, but I'm a selfish creature, and I can't seem to make myself leave you. His voice broke slightly. So I'm giving you the choice. Knowing what I am, what I can and cannot offer, do you want me to go? Brielle looked at him, really looked, at the ancient being in a modern suit, powerful enough to kill her with ease, but kneeling before her like a supplicant. At the vulnerability in those inhuman eyes, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. What can you offer? She asked. Specifically. He seemed surprised by the question, but answered carefully. Protection, devotion, resources beyond what any human could provide. Entry into a world you've never imagined, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. My complete loyalty and every ounce of love I'm capable of feeling. He paused. But not children, not aging together, not normalcy, and always, always the danger that comes from being connected to vampire politics. And if I wanted to become like you? No, the word was sharp, immediate. I won't turn you, Brielle. The transformation is agonizing, and immortality is a burden I wouldn't wish on anyone I loved. If you choose to be with me, it will be as you are. She absorbed this, her mind working through implications. A relationship with an expiration date built in her death whenever it came. A life split between the normal world and whatever vampire society looked like. Constant danger from his enemies. But also, if she was honest, Exactly what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. Someone who made her feel alive in a way she'd never experienced. Love that was epic and consuming and utterly impractical. "I have questions," she said finally. "So many questions about how this would work, about your world, about everything." "And I'll answer all of them," Isidore promised. "I'll hide nothing else from you, I swear it." "Okay." She reached out, her hand finding his face, feeling the cool smoothness of his skin. "Then I choose you, Vampire King and all." The relief that flooded his expression was almost painful to witness. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You're certain?" "Terrified and certain," she confirmed. "Now kiss me properly before I change my mind." He did, rising from his knees and pulling her up into his arms with inhuman strength. His mouth found hers, cool and hungry, and Brielle felt the last of her reservations burn away in the heat of it. This was right. Impossible and complicated and potentially disastrous, but right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard despite only one of them needing air, Isidore rested his forehead against hers. "We should discuss logistics. You'll need to meet others of my kind, learn our laws. There will be vampires who object to this relationship, who'll see you as a weakness to exploit." "Then we'll deal with them," Brielle said, feeling braver than she had any right to. "Together." "Together," he echoed, and smiled a real smile, full of warmth and wonder. "I do love the sound of that." The next few weeks were a crash course in a world Brielle had never imagined. Isidore introduced her to his realm carefully, starting with the basics. Vampires lived in courts organized by territory, with rulers who'd held power for centuries. Isidore's northern court controlled everything from Maine to the Great Lakes, a domain of over 200 vampires, each powerful and dangerous in their own right. Their headquarters was a massive estate hidden beneath the city, accessible through tunnels that ran under historic buildings. The architecture was Gothic and grand, all vaulted ceilings and marble floors, lit by chandeliers that probably predated electricity. It was beautiful and terrifying, like stepping into a bygone era. "This is Octavia," Isidore said, introducing Brielle to a woman who looked about 30, but whose eyes suggested centuries. She had the same white hair and pale skin as Isidore, though her features were more delicate. "My second-in-command and oldest friend." Octavia looked Brielle up and down with unconcealed skepticism. "This is the human you've been neglecting your duties for. She's pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly worth the political upheaval you've caused." "Octavia." Isidore's voice held a warning. "I'm merely being honest." Octavia turned her attention back to Brielle. "Do you have any idea what you've done, little human? By accepting the king's affection, you've made yourself both a symbol and a target. There are vampires who will see your relationship as a weakness to exploit, others who will view you as an insult to our kind." "Then they can take it up with me," Brielle replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm not going to apologize for it either." Something flickered in Octavia's expression, possibly respect. "Well, at least she has spine. You'll need it, human, if you intend to survive in our world." The first real test came 2 weeks later. Isidore had warned her there would be a formal gathering of the court, a monthly assembly where business was conducted and grievances were heard. She'd expected it to be awkward, but she hadn't anticipated the open hostility. The throne room, because of course there was a throne room, was packed with vampires, all of them pale and beautiful and utterly inhuman, despite their modern dress. Brielle stood at Isidore's side, her hand in his, feeling like a rabbit in a den of wolves. "My king," a vampire near the front called out, his voice carrying across the chamber. He was tall and sharp-featured, with the same white hair but eyes like chips of ice. "We must address the situation with the human, your companion." "Lord Cassius," Isidore acknowledged, his tone neutral. "You have a concern to raise?" "I do. By bringing a human into our midst, you've violated traditions that have kept us safe for millennia. She knows our secrets, our weaknesses. What's to stop her from betraying us to her kind?" "Me," Isidore said simply. "I am what stops her, because I trust her, and you trust me. That should be sufficient." "Should it?" Another vampire stepped forward, a woman in an elegant black gown. "We've followed you for over a century, my king, because you've been wise and cautious, but this is neither. You've allowed sentiment to cloud your judgment." Brielle felt Isidore tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped forward, squeezing his hand once before releasing it. "May I speak?" the assembled vampires murmured, but Isidore nodded. "You may." "You're right to be concerned," Brielle said, projecting her voice as much as her nerves would allow. "I'm human, I'm fragile and mortal, and I don't belong in your world by any traditional measure, but I'm also not stupid. I know what exposure would mean for Isidore, for all of you, and I know what I'd lose if I betrayed that trust." "And what would you lose, little human?" Cassius asked mockingly. "Your vampire lover? Hardly a deterrent when you could simply find another warm body to share your bed." "My life," Brielle replied bluntly, "because if I betray you all, Isidore wouldn't be able to protect me from the consequences. I'd be dead within a day. I'm not interested in dying, Lord Cassius. I'm quite fond of living, actually." She has a point. Octavia called from her position near the throne. "The human survival is directly tied to our secrecy. She has every motivation to keep our secrets." "Beyond which," Isidore interjected, his voice carrying a note of command that silenced the murmuring, "Brielle is under my personal protection. Any who would harm her would have to go through me first. Is there anyone here who wishes to challenge me for the right to determine my own companions?" The room went very quiet. Brielle understood intellectually that Isidore was powerful, but seeing an entire assembly of immortal predators back down from his gaze drove home exactly what that meant. "I thought not," Isidore continued. "Brielle Norton is my chosen companion, and she will be treated with the respect that position demands. Are there any other concerns?" There weren't. The assembly moved on to other business territorial disputes, requests for resources, reports from vampires in other regions. Brielle stood beside the throne, acutely aware of the eyes that kept drifting to her, assessing, judging. When the gathering finally ended, Isidore pulled her aside into a private chamber. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands coming up to frame her face. That was more hostile than I anticipated. "I'm okay." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from it. "Octavia was right, though. I need to be able to defend myself if I'm going to be part of your world. What if someone decides to come after me when you're not around? Then they'll discover that attacking what belongs to the Vampire King is a fatal error," Isidore said darkly. Isidore." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I'm serious. I can't just be your weakness, the thing your enemies use against you. I need to be able to protect myself." He studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering across his features. "You want me to teach you? Can you? I can teach you our laws, our customs, how to navigate vampire politics. Self-defense against supernatural beings is more complicated. You'll never have our strength or speed. But yes, I can teach you to be less vulnerable." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "When did you become so fierce?" "When I fell in love with a vampire king," she replied. "It seemed like a good time to develop a spine." "I do love you," he said softly. "More than I should, more than is wise. You know that, don't you?" "I know." She rose on her toes, kissing him gently. "And I love you back. Even though you're impossibly old and drink blood and have stupid vampire politics to deal with," he laughed. The sound rare and wonderful. Stupid vampire politics. I should have that inscribed somewhere. Over the following months, Brielle's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She still took freelance design work, still met Maya for coffee, still maintained the surface appearance of normalcy. But her nights belonged to Isidore's world. He taught her about vampire hierarchies, about the delicate balance of power between courts, about the laws that governed their kind. She learned which vampires could be trusted and which viewed her as an interloper. She discovered that vampire society was simultaneously more civilized and more brutal than human politics. Disagreements were settled with formal duels rather than backroom deals, but the consequences of losing were often permanent. Octavia, surprisingly, became something like a friend. The ancient vampire seemed to appreciate Brielle's refusal to be cowed by the supernatural, and she began teaching Brielle things Isidore either didn't think to mention or didn't want her to know. "The king is powerful," Octavia told her one night as they sat in one of the estate's many libraries. "But his position isn't absolute. If enough of the court united against him, they could force him to abdicate or worse. Worse? Brielle looked up from the book on vampire law she'd been reading. Death. Permanent, final death. Were difficult to kill, but not impossible. Sunlight, fire, decapitation, these things can end even the oldest of us. Octavia's expression was serious. You need to understand that your relationship with Isidore makes him vulnerable in ways he hasn't been for centuries. Love is a weapon in our world, one that can be used against those foolish enough to feel it. Then why hasn't anyone tried? Brielle asked. If I'm such a liability? Because they're afraid of him, and because, thus far, you've proven less disruptive than anticipated. But there are other courts, Brielle, other vampire kings and queens who might see an opportunity in Isidore's attachment to a human. You need to be prepared for that. The warning proved prescient. 2 months into Brielle's integration into vampire society, Isidore received a formal communication from the Southern Court. Their queen, Seraphine, requested a meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. She's coming here? Brielle asked, watching Isidore read the letter with an expression of deep displeasure. She is. In 3 days. He set the paper aside, rubbing his temples in a gesture of frustration. Seraphine is old, cunning, and utterly ruthless. She doesn't do anything without multiple layers of strategy behind it. What does she want? That's what concerns me. The Southern Court and mine have maintained a careful peace for over a century, neither interfering in the other's territory. For her to request a personal meeting suggests she wants something significant. His eyes met Brielle's. And I fear you're going to be part of whatever game she's playing. Queen Seraphine arrived precisely on schedule, sweeping into Isidore's estate with an entourage of 6 vampires, all of them radiating power and menace. She was breathtaking in a terrible way. White hair cascaded down her back in waves, and her eyes were the pale gold of a predator. She wore modern clothes with the bearing of someone accustomed to historical gowns, all grace and deadly elegance. Isidore, she greeted, her voice like honey over broken glass. How delightful to see you again. It's been, 50 years since we last spoke in person? 62, Isidore replied, bowing with precise courtesy. Queen Seraphine, welcome to my court. May I introduce Brielle Norton, my companion? Seraphine's golden eyes fixed on Brielle with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held her ground, meeting that ancient gaze as steadily as she could manage. The human, Seraphine said, sounding almost delighted. I'd heard rumors, but I confess I thought them exaggerated. You've truly bound yourself to a mortal, Isidore? How wonderfully tragic. If you've come merely to comment on my personal life, you could have sent a letter, Isidore said coolly. Oh, but where would be the fun in that? Seraphine circled Brielle slowly, like a cat examining a mouse. Besides, I wanted to see for myself what could possibly tempt the great vampire king of the north to break centuries of tradition. She must be quite special. She is, Isidore said, a warning note entering his voice. I'm standing right here, Brielle interjected, tired of being discussed in third person. If you have questions about me, Your Majesty, you can ask me directly. Seraphine's laugh was like silver bells. Oh, I do like her. She has fire. The vampire queen stopped directly in front of Brielle, close enough that Brielle could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her. Tell me, little human, what do you love about our dear Isidore? Is it the power, the immortality he could theoretically grant you? The wealth? None of those things, Brielle replied honestly. I love him because he sees me as I am, not as what he wants me to be. Because he makes me laugh, because even though he's lived for centuries and could have anyone, he chose me. How romantic! Seraphine's tone made it sound like an insult. And how naive. Do you truly believe this can end well? You'll grow old while he remains unchanged. You'll die, probably within his lifetime. And he'll be left with nothing but memories of a brief mortal love. I know, Brielle said quietly. We've discussed it. I'm choosing this anyway. Fascinating. Seraphine turned to Isidore. She really is remarkable. Which is why I'm going to make you an offer, old friend. I have access to certain resources, ancient magics that could extend her life, make her aging far slower than normal. She wouldn't be vampire, but she wouldn't be quite so fragile either. Interested? Isidore's expression shuddered completely. What's the cost? Smart man, always asking the right questions. Seraphine moved to a chair, settling into it like it was a throne. The ritual would require significant power, the kind that can only be generated by a vampire of royal blood. Your blood specifically, Isidore, and quite a lot of it, enough to weaken you for months, possibly years. No, Brielle said immediately. Absolutely not. The human has opinions, Seraphine observed. How refreshing. It's not about opinions, Brielle shot back. You just said it yourself. Vampires with power see weaknesses to exploit. If Isidore is weakened, his enemies would use that opportunity to challenge him. I won't be responsible for putting him in danger. Even if it means gaining decades more with him, perhaps a century? Seraphine's smile was knowing. That's quite a sacrifice in the name of love. That's what love is, Brielle replied. Putting the other person's safety above your own desires. Isidore moved to her side, his hand finding hers. And I won't use dark magic to artificially extend your life, even if it didn't require my blood. You're human, Brielle. I fell in love with a human woman, with all the limitations and beauty that entails. Changing that would change you. How terribly noble, Seraphine said, sounding almost bored. Well, I've made my offer. When you come to your senses and realize the inevitable tragedy of your situation, you know how to reach me. She rose, smoothing her dress. Now, shall we discuss the real reason I'm here? The real reason, it turned out, was a territorial dispute between their courts over a city that sat on the border. A group of vampires had been making claims to both courts, playing them against each other, and Seraphine wanted to resolve it before it escalated into open conflict. The negotiations took hours, with both monarchs trading concessions and demands with the precision of chess masters. Brielle watched, learning, seeing Isidore in his role as king in a way she hadn't before. He was brilliant at it, firm but fair, strategic without being cruel. By the time they reached an agreement, even Seraphine seemed grudgingly impressed. You've grown wiser with age, the Southern Queen observed as she prepared to depart, though I still think you're a fool for the human. Love makes us weak, Isidore. You of all vampires should remember that. Love makes us human, Isidore countered, or as close as our kind can come to it. I'll take that over the cold calculation that's kept you alone for 5 centuries. Seraphine's smile was brittle. We'll see which of us is proven right. Enjoy your mortal love while it lasts, old friend. These things always end in tears. After she left, Brielle found Isidore standing on one of the estate's many balconies, looking out over the city lights. She joined him, slipping under his arm and into his embrace. She's wrong, Brielle said firmly, about us ending in tears. Is she? Isidore's voice was heavy. Brielle, I've lived for over 300 years. I've watched empires rise and fall, seen the world transform in ways the people of my human life could never have imagined. And you'll have what? 50 more years if you're fortunate? 60? Are you saying you regret this? Us? Never. He pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head. But I'm saying Seraphine is right about one thing. This will end in grief. Your death will destroy me in ways I can't even begin to articulate. Then we make the most of the time we have, Brielle said. We love each other as hard as we can for as long as we can. And when I'm gone, you'll have those memories. Isn't that better than never having loved at all? I used to think so, he admitted. Now I'm not certain. But I'm too selfish to let you go, even knowing the pain that's coming. They stood together in silence, the weight of mortality hanging between them like a sword. Brielle understood then, really understood what Isidore had given up by choosing to love her. Not just the political complications or the danger, but the certainty of loss, the guaranteed heartbreak that came with loving something that would inevitably end. I'm sorry, she whispered, for being human, for not being able to stay with you forever. Don't apologize for being exactly what I fell in love with, Isidore said fiercely. He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face. You are perfect, Brielle Norton, human and mortal and absolutely perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about you. Even though it means losing me? Even then. He kissed her, and she tasted something like desperation in it, like he was trying to memorize the moment. I'd choose you 1,000 times over, knowing how this ends. You're worth every moment of eventual pain. Spring turned to summer, and Brielle's life continued to straddle both worlds. She'd landed a major contract with a museum, designing their entire digital presence, which gave her more financial stability than she'd had in years. She'd also become a familiar presence at Isidore's court, enough so that the vampires had stopped treating her like a curiosity and started treating her like an actual person with her own authority. Maya finally met Isidore properly at a dinner Brielle had arranged carefully during evening hours. Her best friend had been skeptical until she saw them together, saw the way Isidore looked at Brielle like she was the sun itself. Afterward, Maya had pulled Brielle aside. "Okay, I get it now," Maya had said. "He's completely in love with you. It's actually kind of overwhelming to witness." "Is it too much?" Brielle had asked, suddenly worried. "No, it's perfect. You deserve someone who looks at you like that. Just promise me you'll invite me to the wedding if that happens." Brielle had laughed, but the comment stuck with her. She and Isidore had never discussed marriage, mostly because the concept seemed absurd when discussing a relationship between a mortal and an immortal. What would be the point of promising forever when forever meant such different things to them? She raised it one night as they lay together in Isidore's private chambers, her head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat that was slower than a human's, but still reassuringly present. "Do vampires marry?" she asked. "Historically, yes, though it's fallen out of favor in recent centuries." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Maya mentioned weddings, and I realized we've never talked about it." Isidore was quiet for a long moment. "Would you want that? A marriage?" "I don't know," Brielle admitted. "It feels strange when we've already acknowledged our relationship has an expiration date. But then again, don't all marriages? People get divorced. People die. Maybe we're just more honest about the temporary nature of it." "I would marry you," Isidore said quietly. "If you wanted it. I'd stand before my entire court and claim you as my wife, my queen, my everything. The political complications would be significant, but I'd do it gladly if it would make you happy." Brielle pushed up on her elbow, looking down at him. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of intent." His hand came up, brushing her hair back from her face. "If you want a formal proposal, beloved, I'll give you one. I'll fill your apartment with flowers and get down on one knee like a proper human suitor. I'll give you a ring worth a small fortune and ask you to spend your life with me, knowing that I'm asking for all the years you have while offering only a fraction of mine in return." "That's the saddest proposal I've ever heard," Brielle said, but she was smiling through sudden tears. "Then let me amend it." Isidore sat up, bringing them face to face. "Brielle Norton, you are the most extraordinary thing to happen to me in over 3 centuries of existence. You make me remember what it's like to feel human, to hope, to plan for a future beyond mere survival. I want to spend every remaining moment of your life showing you exactly how precious you are. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, barely getting the word out before she was kissing him, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, absolutely yes." The wedding was planned for autumn, a small ceremony by vampire standards but elaborate by human ones. Brielle invited Maya and a handful of other close friends, telling them Isidore's family was very traditional and preferred evening events. The vampire contingent was larger. Octavia served as Isidore's witness, and several dozen court members attended, filling the estate's grand hall with pale faces and dark elegance. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and vampire traditions. They exchanged rings under moonlight in the estate's garden, surrounded by candles and autumn flowers. Isidore wore black, formal, and regal, looking every inch the vampire king. Brielle had chosen a dress in deep midnight blue, eschewing traditional white for something that felt more appropriate to the occasion. When Isidore spoke his vows, his voice carried across the assembled crowd. "I pledge to you my protection, my devotion, and every day of your life. I will guard you against all threats, honor you above all others, and love you until your final breath and beyond. You are my heart, Brielle Norton, and I am yours." Brielle's own vows were simpler, but no less sincere. "I pledge to you my trust, my love, and all my mortal days. I will stand beside you, support you, and love you for as long as I live. You are my choice, Isidore Hargrove, today and always." They sealed the vows with a kiss, and the assembled vampires, to Brielle's surprise, actually applauded. Even Cassius, who'd been so hostile at first, offered a bow of acknowledgement. The reception was held inside, with music and dancing that went until nearly dawn. Brielle found herself passed from vampire to vampire, each offering congratulations or advice with varying degrees of sincerity. But always, Isidore was nearby, watching, ensuring she was safe and comfortable. Maya cornered her near midnight, slightly tipsy on expensive wine. "Your husband's friends are really intense," she said, "but they clearly respect you. How'd you manage that?" "By not backing down," Brielle replied honestly, "and by loving Isidore enough that they couldn't question my commitment." "He's good for you," Maya observed. "I've never seen you this confident, this sure of yourself." "He gave me permission to be myself," Brielle said, watching Isidore across the room as he spoke with Octavia. "Not in the sense that I needed his permission, but he saw who I really was underneath all my doubts and insecurities, and he loved that person. Once I saw myself through his eyes, I couldn't go back to being small." As the night wore on and the human guests began to leave, the vampire portion of the reception continued. There were formal presentations, gifts from various court members, pledges of loyalty to their king and his new queen. That last part still felt surreal to Brielle. She was a queen now, at least in title, with all the protection and danger that entailed. When they finally retreated to their chambers, exhausted and happy, Isidore pulled her into his arms with a sigh of relief. "That went better than I anticipated. I half expected someone to object during the ceremony." "Would you have fought them if they did?" Brielle asked, amused. "Without hesitation." He said it seriously, and she believed him. "You're mine now, Brielle Hargrove. Formally, officially, by the laws of both our kinds. Anyone who wants to change that will have to go through me." "Brielle Hargrove," she repeated, testing the name. "I like it. It sounds regal." "You are regal," Isidore said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "My queen in truth, regardless of the title." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Brielle moved into the estate fully, though she kept her apartment as a retreat when she needed space or wanted to work without vampires appearing at odd hours. She took on a formal role in the court, using her design skills to help with their public-facing businesses and her growing political acumen to advise Isidore on matters of diplomacy. A year passed, then two. Brielle's human friends noticed she seemed to keep odd hours but attributed it to her successful career and wealthy husband. Maya was the only one who suspected there was more to Isidore than met the eye, but she never pushed for details Brielle wasn't willing to share. The challenges came from within vampire society instead. A faction of traditional vampires, led by a lord named Constantine, began pushing for Isidore to take a vampire consort in addition to his human wife. "It's not about rejecting your marriage," Octavia explained during one of their private conversations. "It's about bloodline and immortality. They want to ensure the kingship passes to someone of pure vampire blood when the time comes." "When I die," Brielle said flatly. "You can say it, Octavia. I know I'm mortal." "When you die," Octavia agreed quietly. "Isidore has refused, of course. He won't take another partner while you live. But the pressure is mounting." Brielle brought it up with Isidore that night. "I heard about Constantine's proposal." "It's not a proposal. It's an insult," Isidore said sharply. "To you, to our marriage, to everything we've built together. I won't entertain it." "But they have a point." "Don't they?" Brielle asked carefully. "About succession and bloodlines. What happens to the Northern Court when I die and you're left without an heir? I'll name one from among the court members, or I'll step down and let someone else rule. I don't care, Brielle. What I won't do is dishonor you by taking another lover while claiming to be your husband." She moved into his arms, holding him tightly. "I trust you. I just don't want to be the reason your court falls into chaos." "You could never be that," Isidore insisted. "You've brought stability and perspective I didn't know I was missing. The court is stronger because of you." The issue came to a head 3 months later during a formal assembly. Constantine stood before the court, making his case with passionate eloquence. "Our king deserves an immortal companion, one who can stand beside him through centuries, not merely decades. We don't ask him to set aside the human, merely to acknowledge the reality of her limited lifespan and plan accordingly." Before Isidore could respond, Brielle stood. The room went silent. It was rare for her to speak during assemblies, rarer still for her to challenge another vampire directly. "Lord Constantine," she said clearly, "you speak of my limited lifespan as though it's a flaw in my character rather than a simple fact of biology. And you frame your proposal as though it's in the king's best interest, when really it's about your own discomfort with his choice of bride." Constantine's expression tightened. "You presume much, human." "I'm not just human. I'm your queen." Brielle let that sink in. "And as your queen, I'm telling you that your concerns are noted but irrelevant. My husband has made his choice clear. Continuing to pressure him is not only disrespectful to me, it's bordering on insubordination to him." "Well said," Octavia called from her position near the throne. Constantine looked to Isidore. "My king, surely you don't intend to let a mortal dictate court policy." "I intend to let my wife speak her mind," Isidore replied, standing to join Brielle, "and I intend to support her in that." "She's right, Constantine. Your concerns are noted, but my decision stands. There will be no other consort while Brielle lives. After her death," his voice caught slightly, "we'll address succession. Until then, this matter is closed." The challenge to their marriage faded after that, though Brielle knew the underlying concerns remained. She tried not to think about what would happen after she was gone, tried not to imagine Isidore eventually moving on with some beautiful vampire who could actually give him eternity. Instead, she focused on the present, on the life they were building together day by day. Their 5th anniversary arrived with little fanfare. They'd agreed to celebrate privately, just the two of them, away from court politics and vampire intrigue. Isidore took her to a cabin in the mountains, remote and beautiful, where they could watch the stars without the light pollution of the city. 5 years, Brielle mused as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "That's longer than I dated Derek, longer than most of my friendships have lasted. It feels like forever and no time at all." "That's because you're thinking in human terms," Isidore said. "For me, 5 years is barely a moment, yet somehow these 5 years with you have felt fuller, richer than entire decades without you." "Do you ever regret it?" Brielle asked, "choosing something you knew would end?" "Every time I see a new gray hair on your head, every time I notice your hands aren't quite as smooth as they were, every time you move a little slower than before, yes, I regret the inevitable end." He pulled her closer. "But I've never once regretted loving you. The pain of losing you will be worth every moment of having you." Brielle was quiet, absorbing that. She was 33 now, no longer the 28-year-old who desperately begged a stranger to pretend to love her. 5 years with Isidore had changed her in fundamental ways. She was stronger, more confident, more certain of her worth. But she was also undeniably aging in ways he never would. "I found a gray hair last week," she admitted. "My first one. I pulled it out, but I know there will be more." "I think you'll be beautiful with gray hair," Isidore said. "You'll be beautiful at 40, at 50, at 80. Age changes the package, beloved, but not the soul inside." That's what I fell in love with. "Promise me something," Brielle said suddenly. "When I'm gone, don't let yourself become bitter. Don't let my death turn you into one of those cold, cruel vampires who've forgotten how to feel. Find joy again, eventually. Love again if you can." "Don't ask me to promise that," Isidore said roughly. "I can't imagine loving anyone the way I love you." "You couldn't imagine loving a human 5 years ago either," Brielle pointed out. "People change, even immortal people. Just promise me you'll try to be happy, that you won't spend the next 300 years mourning." "I'll promise to try," Isidore said finally, "though I make no guarantees of success." They stayed at the cabin for a week, existing in a bubble where vampire politics and mortality couldn't touch them. They talked about everything and nothing, made love under the stars, and pretended for a little while that time didn't matter. When they returned to the city, reality reasserted itself quickly. There was trouble brewing with the Western court. Their king, Lucian, was making territorial claims that encroached on Isidore's domain. It required careful diplomacy and several tense negotiations that left Isidore frustrated and exhausted. "Come to bed," Brielle urged one night after a particularly long session with his advisors. "You're no good to anyone if you're too tired to think straight." "I don't technically need sleep," Isidore pointed out, but he followed her anyway. "No, but you need rest. There's a difference. She pulled him down onto the bed, curling into his side. Tell me what's really bothering you. Is it just Lucian's territorial grab, or is there something more? Isidore was silent for a long moment. Finally, I'm tired, Brielle. Not physically, but existentially. I've been doing this for over 3 centuries. The politics, the power plays, the endless jockeying for position among beings who never change because they can't die. You've reminded me what it's like to live rather than simply exist, but that makes the rest of it feel even more hollow. Then step down, Brielle said quietly. If it's not making you happy anymore, find someone else to be king. It's not that simple. The transfer of power is complicated, and there are those who would see my abdication as weakness. So? Let them think what they want. You've been king for how long? 140 years. That's long enough, don't you think? You've earned the right to retire, to live for yourself rather than for duty. She propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him. We could go somewhere remote, somewhere you wouldn't have to deal with court politics and power struggles. We could just be together, for whatever time we have left. And what happens to the Northern Court without strong leadership? Isidore asked. Octavia could rule, or someone else you trust. You could help them transition, make sure it's stable. But Isidore, you can't carry this burden forever just because you're immortal. That's not living. That's just going through the motions. He stared at her, something like wonder in his expression. You'd want that? To leave the city, the court, everything we've built here? I'd want you happy, Brielle said simply. Everything else is negotiable. The idea took root. Over the next few months, Isidore quietly began preparing for abdication. He approached Octavia first, feeling out her willingness to take the throne. To his surprise, she agreed readily. I've been watching you with the human, Octavia said. She's good for you, Isidore. She makes you remember how to be more than just a ruler. And honestly, I think the court could use fresh perspective. You've been king for a long time, my friend. Perhaps it's time to let someone else carry that weight. The formal announcement was made at the Winter Assembly. Isidore stood before his court and declared his intention to step down, naming Octavia as his successor. The reaction was mixed. Some vampires seemed relieved, others concerned, a few openly hostile. But Isidore's authority was still absolute, and when he made it clear this was not up for debate, even the dissenters fell silent. I've served this court for over a century, Isidore said. I've protected our interests, expanded our territory, and maintained peace with our neighbors. Now I'm asking for the right to live the remainder of my wife's mortal life in peace. Queen Octavia will lead you well. Give her the same loyalty you've given me. The transition took 6 months to complete fully. Isidore remained available for consultation, but Octavia assumed more and more of the day-to-day responsibilities. By summer, they were ready to make the move. They chose a house in the Pacific Northwest, deep in the forest, where Isidore could move freely at night without fear of discovery. It was beautiful and isolated, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over trees and mountains. Brielle set up a home office and continued taking freelance work remotely. Isidore finally had time to pursue interests beyond ruling. He took up painting again, something he'd apparently done in his human life, but abandoned centuries ago. Life became simpler, quieter. They had each other and the peace of the forest, and days that stretched into weeks without the intrusion of vampire politics. Brielle was happier than she could remember being, and Isidore seemed to shed years of stress, becoming more relaxed and openly affectionate. This was the right choice, he told her one night as they sat on their deck watching the stars. I should have done it years ago. You weren't ready years ago, Brielle replied. We both needed time to figure out what we really wanted. And what do you want, beloved? Isidore asked. Truly. Brielle considered the question. This. You. A life that's ours rather than dictated by duty or expectations. I want to wake up next to you every day and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to grow old with you, even though you won't grow old with me. I want every moment we have for as long as we have it. Then that's what we'll have, Isidore promised, for as long as we have it. The years continued to pass. Brielle's hair gained more gray, laugh lines appeared around her eyes, and her body began to show the inevitable signs of aging. Isidore remained unchanged, frozen in the prime of his vampire existence, but he never made her feel less beautiful or less desirable. If anything, he seemed to treasure her more with each passing year, as though aware of how finite their time together truly was. When Brielle was 45, she was diagnosed with cancer. It was early stage, treatable, and her doctors were optimistic. But the diagnosis was a stark reminder of her mortality, of all the ways a human body could fail. Isidore was terrified in a way she'd never seen. He wanted to seek out Seraphine, to beg for that life-extending ritual despite the cost. Brielle refused absolutely. "No dark magic," she said firmly. "We knew this was coming eventually. Maybe not this specific thing, but something. I'm human, Isidore. Humans get sick. We'll fight this the normal way, and whatever happens, happens." "I can't lose you," Isidore said, his voice breaking. "Not yet. It's too soon." "It's always too soon," Brielle replied gently. "But I'm not gone yet, and I'm not planning to go without a fight." The treatment was brutal surgery, followed by chemotherapy that left her weak and nauseous. Isidore was beside her through all of it, holding her hair when she vomited, carrying her when she was too tired to walk, sitting with her through the long nights when pain kept her awake. "You don't have to do this," she told him during one particularly bad night. "I know it's hard to watch." "Where else would I be?" he replied, stroking her hair. "You're my wife, my heart. There's nowhere else I want to be but here." She made it through the treatment. The cancer went into remission, and slowly, painfully, Brielle regained her strength. But the experience had changed them both. There was a new urgency to the way they approached each day, a determination to make every moment count. On Brielle's 50th birthday, Isidore took her back to the city for the first time in years. They visited the gallery where they had met, which was hosting another exhibition. Brielle stood in the same spot where she'd first seen Derek approaching, where she'd grabbed a stranger's sleeve and begged him to pretend to love her. "I should thank him," she said, almost to herself. "Derek, I mean. If he hadn't been such an ass, if I hadn't been desperate to save face, I would never have approached you." "The universe has a strange sense of humor," Isidore agreed. He'd aged well in appearance, somehow looking more human after years away from court politics, though of course his face remained unlined. "Though I prefer to think we would have found each other eventually, regardless of the circumstances." "You think we're fated?" Brielle asked, amused. "I think some connections transcend logic and planning. Ours is one of them." He pulled her close, right there in the middle of the gallery. "I love you, Brielle Hargrove. More now than I did on the day we met, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for pretending to love me that night." "I wasn't pretending," Isidore said. "Not really. I was intrigued from the moment you spoke, fascinated by the end of the evening. By the time we had our first real date, I was already half in love with you. I just didn't recognize it yet." They spent the evening revisiting old haunts, the restaurant where they'd had their first dinner, the museum where Isidore had explained Byzantine art with infectious enthusiasm, the park where they'd taken late-night walks before Brielle fully understood why Isidore avoided daytime. Each place held memories, pieces of their story woven into the fabric of the city. Before they left to return home, they stopped by the estate. Octavia greeted them warmly, looking every bit the queen she'd become. The court was thriving under her rule. She explained she'd instituted some reforms, strengthened alliances with other courts, and generally proved herself a worthy successor. "You made the right choice," Octavia told Isidore privately. "Stepping down, I mean. You're happier than I've ever seen you." "I am," Isidore agreed. "Thank you for making it possible." "Thank Brielle," Octavia replied. "She's the one who had the courage to suggest it, and the wisdom to know it was what you needed." The years continued to accumulate. Brielle's 60th birthday came and went, then her 65th. She moved slower now, her joints protesting in ways they never had before, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit strong. She'd published a book on design theory that had done surprisingly well. She'd reconnected with Maya, who'd married and had children, and was now facing her own mortality with the approach of retirement age. When Brielle was 70, she had a heart attack. It was mild and she recovered, but it was another reminder that time was running out. Isidore became almost obsessive about her health, monitoring everything, hovering in a way that would have been annoying if it hadn't been so clearly rooted in love and fear. "Odd, I'm not made of glass," she told him gently, after he'd insisted she rest following a short walk. "I'm old, yes, but I'm not broken." "Not yet," Isidore said, his voice tight, "but you will be. You'll break, and I won't be able to fix you, and then you'll be gone." Brielle took his face in her wrinkled hands. "Yes, that's how mortality works. But Isidore, we've had over 40 years together, 40 incredible years of love and joy and partnership. That's more than most people get. When I'm gone, I don't want you dwelling on the ending. I want you remembering the middle, the bulk of it, all the good parts." "There are no bad parts," Isidore said. "Even the hard times were worthwhile because we faced them together." "Then remember that," Brielle urged. "Remember us at our best, at our worst, at our most ordinary. Remember all of it, and let it make you grateful rather than bitter." On their 45th anniversary, Brielle was 73 and increasingly frail. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, toasting with wine Brielle could barely taste anymore but pretended to enjoy because it made Isidore smile. 45 years, Isidore mused, half a human lifespan. A blink for me, but it contains more joy than the 3 centuries before it. "I'm glad I could give you that," Brielle said. Her voice was weaker now, her body finally beginning the inevitable decline that no amount of medical care could prevent forever. "I'm glad we had this time." "I want more time," Isidore said fiercely. "I want decades more, centuries. I want you with me forever." "You'll have me forever," Brielle assured him, "just not physically. I'll be in your memories, in your heart. That's a kind of immortality, too." That winter, Brielle caught pneumonia. At her age, with her weakened system, it was serious. The doctors did what they could, but they prepared Isidore for the possibility that she might not recover. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital before insisting on being brought home. "If I'm going to die," she told Isidore, "I want it to be in our bed, in our house, with you beside me. Not in some sterile hospital room surrounded by machines." So Isidore brought her home, setting up everything she might need, arranging for round-the-clock care. But mostly, he just held her, spending every moment he could at her side. On what would turn out to be her last night, Brielle was lucid and calm. She knew the end was coming, could feel her body shutting down, and she was ready. "I'm not afraid," she told Isidore as he held her hand. "I've had a good life. A love most people only dream of. I have no regrets." "I have one," Isidore said, tears streaming down his face. "I regret every moment I'll have to spend without you." "Don't," Brielle said firmly. "You promised me you'd try to be happy. I'm holding you to that promise, Isidore Hargrove." "I'll try," he whispered. "For you, I'll try." "Good," she smiled, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for that night at the gallery, for pretending when I asked, for making it real. Thank you for every day since. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "You gave me everything," Isidore replied. "You made me remember what it was to be alive, to feel, to love. You saved me, Brielle, in every way a person can be saved." "Then we saved each other," Brielle said. "What a beautiful thing that is." She died as the sun was rising. Her hand in Isidore's, a smile on her face. Isidore felt the moment she left, felt the absence of her presence like a physical wound. He held her body for hours, unable to let go, grieving in a way he hadn't since his human life ended 3 centuries before. Eventually, Octavia came. She'd sensed the death somehow, or perhaps just knew it was time. She helped Isidore make arrangements, handled the human authorities, and stayed with him through the worst of it. "She loved you," Octavia said at the funeral, a small affair with Brielle's few remaining friends and a select group of vampires who'd come to respect the human queen. "More than I've ever seen anyone love, and you loved her just as much. Hold on to that, Isidore. Don't let the grief erase the joy." The first year was the hardest. Isidore existed more than lived, going through motions without real purpose. He stayed in their house in the forest, surrounded by her things, unable to bring himself to change anything. But slowly, painfully, he began to heal. He painted again, creating portraits of Brielle at different ages, young and vibrant at 28, confident and regal at 40, beautiful and weathered at 70. He wrote down their story, every detail he could remember, determined that her impact on his existence wouldn't be forgotten. In the second year, he began venturing out more. He visited the city, checked in with Octavia and the court, reconnected with the world he'd left behind. And he started, tentatively, to imagine a future that honored Brielle's memory without being consumed by it. He never remarried, never took another lover. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. What he'd had with Brielle was complete unto itself, a perfect thing that didn't need replacing or repeating. But he did learn to be happy again, in his own way. He found joy in art, in travel, in helping younger vampires navigate the complicated existence they'd been born into. He established a foundation in Brielle's name, supporting emerging artists and designers. He told their story to anyone who would listen, keeping her alive through memory and love. Decades passed. Then a century. The world changed around Isidore, technology advanced, societies transformed, but he remained, carrying Brielle with him in his heart. And when other vampires asked him about love, about whether it was worth the inevitable pain, he always gave them the same answer. I spent 300 years without her and 45 years with her. And those 45 years were worth every moment of the eternity I'll spend missing her. Love is always worth it, even when it ends, especially when it ends. Because the alternative is never loving at all, and that's no way to exist, mortal or immortal. In his private moments, in the quiet of the house they'd shared, Isidore would sometimes stand at the window where they'd watched countless sunsets together, and he'd speak to her as though she could hear. I kept my promise, beloved. I'm trying to be happy. Some days are easier than others, but I'm trying. And I'm grateful, so grateful for the gift of knowing you, of loving you, of being loved by you in return. Thank you for asking me to pretend that night. Thank you for making it real. Thank you for 45 years of joy and partnership and love that sustained me then and sustains me still. The house remained exactly as it had been when Brielle was alive, a shrine to a love that had transcended the boundaries of mortality and immortality, proving that even temporary things could have permanent impact. And Isidore remained, guardian of their story, living proof that a vampire king could have a human heart, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was walk up to a stranger and beg them to act like they loved them, never knowing that the pretense would become the most real thing in either of their lives.